A gunshot echoed through the Montana wilderness, sending birds scattering from their perches as Tessa Harper stumbled through the underbrush, clutching her side where blood seeped through her fingers. The year was 1876, and she had just escaped from the men who murdered her father. Her lungs burned with each desperate breath as she pushed herself forward, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind her. The rushing water ahead promised salvation, if only she could reach it. Quincy Wade had been tracking a buck since dawn when he heard the gunfire. Standing in the shallows of the Yellowstone River, his boots wet and a fishing rod in hand, he squinted against the morning sun as a figure emerged from the tree line. Her blue dress was torn and muddied, her chestnut hair falling loose from its pins. She took 3 faltering steps toward the water before her legs gave out. "Help," she whispered, the word barely audible over the rushing current. Quincy dropped his fishing rod and sprinted across the rocky shore. He reached her just as she collapsed at the river's edge, her body crumpling like a marionette with cut strings. "Hold on, I've got you now," he said, his strong arms catching her before she hit the ground. Her eyes, the color of summer sage, fluttered as consciousness slipped away from her. Blood stained his hands as he lifted her. Far too much blood. "Stay with me," he urged, cradling her against his chest. His horse nickered nervously at the scent of blood. Quincy mounted with difficulty, keeping the wounded woman secure against him. "We need to get you to Doc Fletcher's, and fast." The woman stirred against him. "They'll be looking for me," she murmured. "Who will?" Quincy asked, but she had already fainted again. He spurred his horse into a gallop, heading for the town of River Cross. Tessa drifted between consciousness and darkness, aware only of the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the strong arms that held her. Pain lanced through her side with each jolt, but the stranger's warmth kept the chill of death at bay. She caught glimpses of his face, square jaw covered in stubble, eyes as blue as the Montana sky, worry etched between his brows. "Almost there," he kept saying. "Stay with me." Doc Fletcher's home sat on the outskirts of River Cross, a modest clapboard house with a sign reading "Physician" hanging from the porch. Quincy barely had time to dismount before the doctor opened his door, alerted by the commotion. "What in tarnation?" the elderly man exclaimed, taking in the blood-soaked woman in Quincy's arms. "Found her by the river. She's been shot," Quincy explained, carrying Tessa inside. "Someone's after her." The doctor cleared his examination table with one sweep of his arm. "Put her down here. Martha," he called to his wife. "Bring me hot water and clean linens." Quincy laid Tessa down gently, reluctant to let her go. Her face was pale as milk, her breathing shallow. "You know this woman?" Doc Fletcher asked, cutting away the blood-soaked fabric around the wound. "No," Quincy admitted. "Never seen her before." "Well, she's lucky you found her." Bullet grazed her side, took a chunk of flesh with it, but nothing vital was hit. "She's lost a lot of blood, though." The doctor peered at him over his spectacles. "You planning to stay or go?" Quincy hesitated. By rights, he should alert the sheriff about a shooting victim, then be on his way. This wasn't his business, but the memory of her whispered plea for help kept him rooted to the spot. "I'll stay," he decided, "at least until she wakes up." Martha Fletcher bustled in with supplies and shooed Quincy out to the sitting room while they tended to the wound. He paced the small space, his hat in his hands, blood drying on his shirt. Who was this woman? Who had shot her? Why was she running through the woods alone? An hour later, Doc Fletcher emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "She'll live. Bullet wounds clean, no sign of infection yet. She's young and strong." "Did she say anything? Her name?" The doctor shook his head. "Still unconscious. But she was carrying this." He handed Quincy a small leather-bound journal. "Fell from her pocket. Name inside says Tessa Harper." Quincy turned the journal over in his hands, but didn't open it. That would be prying. You can see her now, the doctor said. But she needs rest. Tessa lay on the examination table, now covered with a clean sheet. Her face had been washed, and her hair combed back from her forehead. She looked younger in repose, perhaps 22 or 23. Quincy pulled a chair beside her and waited. Darkness had fallen when Tessa finally stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding them until they focused on Quincy's face. "You," she whispered. "The man from the river." Quincy leaned forward. "Name's Quincy Wade. I found you wounded by the Yellowstone." She tried to sit up, but winced in pain. "How long have I been here?" "Most of the day. Doc says you'll be all right." Tessa glanced around nervously. "I need to leave. It's not safe. You're not going anywhere with that wound," Quincy said firmly. "Who shot you, Miss Harper?" Her eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" He showed her the journal. "Found this in your pocket. Didn't read it, just saw the name." She relaxed slightly. "They killed my father," she said after a moment. 3 men. They came to our homestead claiming to be from the mining company. When Pa refused to sell our land, they shot him. I ran, but one of them caught me with a bullet." Quincy's jaw tightened. Land disputes were common in the territory, but murder was another matter. "Did you recognize any of them?" "One was called Harlan. Tall man with a scar down his cheek." She shuddered at the memory. "They'll be looking for me. They can't let me live to testify." "You're safe here for now," Quincy assured her. "I'll speak to Sheriff Williams in the morning." Tessa clutched his wrist suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. "No. The mining company owns half the county officials. I don't know who I can trust." Quincy considered this. It wasn't an outlandish claim. The Dakota Mining Company had been buying up land all over the territory, and rumors of strong-arm tactics weren't uncommon. "All right," he said finally. "No sheriff for now. But you need somewhere safe to recover." Martha Fletcher entered with a bowl of broth. "She can stay here tonight, but it's not safe beyond that. Those men might come looking." Quincy nodded. "I have a cabin about 10 miles from here. It's remote, hard to find if you don't know where to look. She could recover there while we figure out what to do." Tessa looked between them, wary but without options. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Wade?"
"You don't know me."
Quincy met her gaze steadily. "My pa taught me never to turn away from someone in need. Simple as that." In the gray light before dawn, Quincy helped Tessa onto his horse. She was dressed in clothes borrowed from Martha Fletcher, a simple blouse and skirt that hung loose on her slender frame. Doc Fletcher had wrapped fresh bandages around her wound and provided laudanum for the pain. "Keep the wound clean," the doctor instructed. "Change the dressing daily. If she develops fever or the wound turns red and hot, get her back here immediately." Quincy nodded, accepting a packet of medical supplies. "Thank you, both of you. I won't forget this." Martha pressed a basket of food into his hands. "Be careful, Quincy. Those mining men don't play fair." They set off as the first rays of sun touched the mountains. Quincy led the horse on foot, keeping to game trails and away from the main roads. Tessa sat silent behind him, one hand pressed to her side, the other gripping the saddle horn. "How are you holding up?" he asked after an hour of travel. "I'm managing," she replied, though her voice was strained. "I've been thinking about what to do next. I need to get word to my uncle in Denver. He's a lawyer, he'll know how to handle this legally." "We can send a telegram from the next town once it's safe," Quincy assured her. They stopped to rest at midday in a sheltered grove. Quincy helped Tessa down from a horse and settled her against a tree trunk. Her face was pale with pain, but she accepted only a small dose of laudanum, wary of dulling her senses too much. "Tell me about your cabin," she said as they shared bread and dried beef from Martha's basket. "Nothing fancy. Built it myself 3 years ago. I trap in winter, guide hunting parties in summer, do odd jobs in between." He smiled slightly. "It's quiet, peaceful." "You live alone?" Just me and Wolf. Her eyes widened. You have a wolf? Quincy chuckled. Dog with some wolf blood. More loyal than most people I've known. They continued their journey through the afternoon, Quincy now riding behind Tessa to support her when the pain made her sway. The terrain grew steeper as they entered the foothills, following a stream that tumbled down from the mountains. Almost there, Quincy said as the sun began to set. They rounded a bend, and his cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled against a rocky outcropping, with a small corral for his horse and a smokehouse nearby. A large gray dog bounded toward them, barking enthusiastically until Quincy called out, "Easy, Wolf. We've got company." Tessa tensed as the animal approached, but Wolf merely sniffed her boots curiously before leading the way to the cabin. "Home sweet home," Quincy said, helping her dismount. "Not what you're used to, I expect." Tessa took in the simple cabin with its stone chimney and split log steps. "It looks perfect," she said softly. "Thank you for bringing me here." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves stocked with provisions, and a curtained-off sleeping area. Quincy quickly built a fire while Tessa eased herself into a chair. "You take the bed," he said, nodding toward the curtain. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't put you out of your bed." "You're not putting me anywhere. I'm offering." His tone brooked no argument. "Let me check your wound, then you should rest." Tessa submitted to his examination, turning her face away as he carefully unwrapped the bandage at her waist. His hands were gentle despite their roughness, and he worked with efficient care. "Looks clean," he pronounced. "Doc Fletcher does good work." He helped her to the bed and drew the curtain to give her privacy. Tessa sank onto the straw mattress with a sigh of relief. Despite the pain and uncertainty, for the first time since watching her father fall, she felt safe. On the other side of the curtain, she heard Quincy moving about, feeding Wolf, preparing something at the stove, the quiet domestic sounds lulling her toward sleep. Just before consciousness slipped away, she heard him humming softly, a gentle melody that followed her into dreams. Tessa woke to sunlight filtering through the cabin's single window. For a moment, disorientation gripped her until memory rushed back: her father's murder, her flight, the wound, the river, and Quincy Wade catching her as she fell. She pushed herself up gingerly, pleased to find the pain in her side had dulled to a manageable ache. The main room was empty, but a cup of coffee and a plate of biscuits waited on the table, still warm. She made her way to the table and picked up a note written in a surprisingly neat hand. "Gone hunting. Wolf is outside. Rest. Back by noon. Q." As if on cue, Wolf scratched at the door. Tessa opened it cautiously, and the dog trotted in, circled the room once, then flopped down by the fireplace, watching her with intelligent eyes. "Just you and me for now, I guess," she told the animal. Tessa used her time alone to take stock of her situation. Her father was dead. Their homestead, which they had worked for 3 years to establish, was likely being claimed by the Dakota Mining Company even now. She had no proof of the murder beyond her own testimony, and if Harlan and his men found her, she'd join her father in the ground. Yet amid this bleakness, there was Quincy Wade, a stranger who had saved her life and offered shelter without question. A man whose cabin told the story of a solitary but purposeful existence. His books surprised her: most volumes of Thoreau, Whitman, and Shakespeare, sharing shelf space with practical guides to trapping and wilderness survival. By the time Quincy returned with 2 rabbits for the stew pot, Tessa had washed her face, rebraided her hair, and made a tentative peace with Wolf, who now allowed her to scratch behind his ears. "You're looking better," Quincy observed, hanging his rifle on pegs by the door. "I feel better. Thank you for breakfast." He nodded, suddenly awkward in his own home with her watching him. "Need to check that wound again after I clean these rabbits." They fell into a quiet routine over the next few days. Quincy hunted and tended his traps, while Tessa gradually took on small tasks as her strength returned, stirring the stew, mending a torn shirt she found in his things, keeping the fire stoked. They spoke little at first, both unaccustomed to company, but silence between them grew comfortable rather than strained. On the fourth evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Quincy finally asked the question that had been hovering between them. "Your father's homestead, where was it exactly?" Tessa tensed. "About 30 miles east of Rivercross. Good land with a year-round spring. Pa found traces of gold in the stream last winter, not enough to mine commercially, but that's when the Dakota representatives started coming around." Quincy nodded slowly. "They've been buying up land all through the territory. Some folks sell willingly for a fair price. Others—" He let the implication hang. "Others get visited by men like Harlan," Tessa finished bitterly. "We should have sold. Pa was stubborn." "A man has a right to keep what's his," Quincy said firmly. "What those men did wasn't just wrong, it was murder. But what can I do about it? It's my word against theirs, and from what I've heard, Dakota mining has judges and lawmen in their pocket." Quincy was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. "There might be a way to get evidence," he said finally. "If we could find something that links Harlan to Dakota mining officially, or witnesses who saw them at your homestead that day." "That's a big risk," Tessa said. "And This isn't your fight, Quincy." He met her gaze steadily. "Maybe not. But I've seen what happens when men like that go unchecked. They don't stop with one homestead." The firelight played across his features, highlighting the determination in his eyes. Tessa realized with a start that in just a few days, this man had become her only ally in the world, and perhaps something more. "Let me think about it," she said softly. "For now, I just need to get my strength back." Quincy nodded, respecting her hesitation. "No rush. You're safe here, for as long as you need." Later that night, as Tessa lay in Quincy's bed listening to his steady breathing from his bedroll by the fire, she made a decision. She would not remain a victim. Somehow, she would find justice for her father, but first, she needed to heal completely. The days settled into a pattern. Each morning, Tessa's wound pained her less. Quincy showed her the hidden paths around his cabin, taught her to identify edible plants, and even began giving her shooting lessons with his old Colt revolver. "You're a natural," he observed as she hit the center of a makeshift target for the third time in a row. "Steady hand." "Pa insisted I learn. Said a woman alone needs to protect herself." Her voice caught on the memory. He was right about that much. 2 weeks passed in this manner, the outside world a distant concern in their mountain sanctuary. Tessa found herself studying Quincy, when he wasn't looking, the careful way he skinned game, without wasting anything, how he spoke to Wolf as though the dog understood every word, the small smile that sometimes appeared when he caught her watching him. One evening, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Tessa finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why do you live alone up here, Quincy? A man like you could have a good life in town." He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was married once. Her name was Sarah. We had a small ranch near Rivercross." He paused, his fingers absently stroking Wolf's fur. "Cholera took her and our baby boy 5 years ago. Afterward, I couldn't bear to stay there." Tessa's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." He nodded, accepting her sympathy without wallowing in it. "What about you? No husband waiting somewhere?"
"No."
"There was a man back in Illinois, son of my father's business partner. The arrangement fell apart when Pa decided to head west." She smiled wryly. Richard Calloway wasn't the sort to follow a dream into the wilderness. "His loss," Quincy said simply, and the quiet certainty in his voice made her cheeks warm. That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains. Tessa woke to the crash of thunder and the cabin creaking in the wind. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, stark flashes. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, memories of another storm the night before they left Illinois making sleep impossible. A particularly loud thunderclap shook the cabin, and before she could stop herself, a small sound of distress escaped her. The curtain to her sleeping area was pulled aside, and Quincy stood there, concern evident even in the darkness. "You all right?" he asked. "Just the storm," she said, embarrassed. "I've never liked thunder." Another flash, another boom that seemed to shake the very mountains. This time, Tessa didn't try to hide her flinch. Without a word, Quincy sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, calloused but gentle. "When I was a boy," he said, "my mother told me thunder was just the mountains talking to each other. Old friends catching up on gossip." Despite her fear, Tessa smiled. "What kind of gossip do mountains share?" "Oh, which valleys have the prettiest flowers? Which streams are running clear? Which stubborn humans have built cabins on their slopes?" His thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand. Nothing to fear. The simple touch anchored her, and as the storm continued to rage outside, they talked about their childhoods, their journeys west, the books they'd read, the places they'd seen. Somewhere in the darkness, as lightning flashed and thunder rolled, something shifted between them, a recognition of connection deeper than circumstance. When dawn broke, Quincy was still sitting beside her, their hands still joined, both having fallen asleep in that position. He woke first, gently disentangling himself, murmuring an apology as he slipped away to start the morning fire. Tessa lay still, watching him through the partly open curtain. In the soft morning light, with his guard down, he looked younger, the weight of solitude temporarily lifted from his shoulders. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to think beyond survival, to consider a future that might include more than just justice, and then an empty road ahead. Later that morning, as they shared coffee at the table, Quincy broached the subject they'd been avoiding. "Your wound's nearly healed. Soon you'll need to decide what comes next." Tessa nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that. I want to send that telegram to my uncle in Denver, but I also want to find proof linking Harlan to Dakota mining." "That means going back to River Cross," Quincy said, his expression grave. "It's dangerous. I know, but I can't hide forever." She met his gaze steadily. "Will you help me?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications beyond the immediate task. Quincy studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Yes," he said simply. "I'll help you." They spent the day preparing. Quincy cleaned his rifles and checked his ammunition supply. Tessa practiced quick drawing the Colt revolver until her hand was steady and sure. They packed provisions for several days, uncertain how long their mission might take. That evening, they spread a map on the table, and Quincy outlined his plan. "We'll approach Rivercross from the north, avoid the main roads. I know people there who aren't fond of Dakota mining. They might help us gather information. And if we find evidence, then we take it to the federal marshal in Helena. Dakota might have local law in their pocket, but federal marshals answer to a higher authority." Tessa traced the route on the map with her finger. "It's a good plan, but Quincy—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "If this goes wrong, I don't want you caught in the middle. This is my fight." Quincy covered her hand with his own. "Not anymore, it isn't. We're in this together now." The simple declaration settled over her like a blanket. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, with the night pressing against the cabin windows and Wolf snoring by the fire, Tessa felt the last of her walls begin to crumble. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why risk everything for someone you barely know?" Quincy's eyes, blue as a summer sky, held hers. "Because from the moment I caught you at that river's edge, something changed. I don't know what to call it, but I know I've never felt it before, not even with Sarah. God rest her soul." He swallowed hard. I've been alone a long time, Tessa. Then you came, and suddenly this cabin wasn't just a place to exist, it became a home again. Tears welled in Tessa's eyes. She turned her hand beneath his, intertwining their fingers. I was running for my life when I found you. I never expected to find a reason to live. With infinite gentleness, Quincy reached out to brush a tear from her cheek. The touch lingered, his rough palm cradling her face. Tessa leaned into the contact, her heart thundering in her chest. Neither could say afterward who moved first, but suddenly the distance between them vanished. His lips found hers, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. Tessa's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as the kiss deepened, years of loneliness dissolving in the heat of their connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens in Rivercross," he whispered, "remember this moment. Remember that you're not alone anymore." Tessa nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting her throat. Instead, she kissed him again, pouring everything she couldn't say into the gesture: gratitude, fear, hope, and the beginnings of love. That night, for the first time, Quincy didn't sleep on his bedroll by the fire. They lay together in the narrow bed, arms entwined, sharing warmth and whispered confidences until sleep claimed them both. No boundaries were crossed beyond that sweet intimacy, both understanding that what grew between them deserved time and care. Dawn found them preparing to depart. Tessa wore her borrowed clothes, now mended and altered to fit her better. Quincy had given her a leather vest for additional protection, and her hair was braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. With a Colt revolver strapped to her hip, she looked more frontier woman than the refined daughter of an Illinois businessman. "Ready?" Quincy asked, holding the cabin door open. Tessa cast one last glance around the simple space that had become her sanctuary. "Ready," she confirmed. They rode double on Quincy's horse, with Wolf trotting alongside. As they descended from the foothills toward the plains below, Tessa found herself memorizing landmarks, committing to memory the path back to the cabin that had, in such a short time, begun to feel like home. The journey to Rivercross took most of the day. They avoided the main trails, instead following game paths and dry creek beds. By late afternoon, they crested a ridge that offered a view of the town in the distance, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the river, with a church steeple marking its center. "We'll wait until dark to go in," Quincy decided. "I know a place on the edge of town where we can stay." A man named Tobias runs a livery stable. He's no friend to Dakota mining. They made camp in a sheltered hollow, eating cold provisions to avoid the telltale smoke of a fire. As the sun began its descent, Tessa felt anxiety building in her chest. After weeks of safety, she was willingly heading back into danger. Quincy noticed her tension. "We can still turn back," he offered. "Head for Denver directly. Let your uncle handle this legally." Tessa shook her head.
"No.
My father deserves justice, and those men need to be stopped before they hurt someone else."
She reached for his hand.
"But thank you for giving me the choice." Darkness fell, and they mounted up again. Wolf was instructed to stay behind. A dog would attract too much attention in town. They approached Rivercross from the east, keeping to the shadows of cottonwood trees that lined the river. Tobias's livery stable sat at the town's edge, a large barn-like structure with a small attached house. A lantern glowed in the window as they approached. Quincy dismounted and helped Tessa down, then knocked softly on the door. It opened to reveal a barrel-chested man with a thick white beard. His eyes widened at the sight of Quincy. "Wade? Thought you were up in your mountain hideaway for the summer." "Need your help, Tobias," Quincy said quietly. "Can we come in?" The old man's gaze shifted to Tessa, narrowed in curiosity. Then he stepped back. "Better hurry. Got eyes everywhere these days." Inside, the house was cluttered but clean, smelling of pipe tobacco and leather polish. Tobias motioned them to sit at a scarred wooden table while he poured coffee. "This about Dakota mining?" he asked bluntly. Quincy glanced at Tessa, who nodded permission for him to explain. "This is Tessa Harper," Quincy began. 3 weeks ago, men working for Dakota Mining murdered her father when he refused to sell his homestead. She was shot trying to escape." Tobias's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Harper? That the place east of town with the big oak by the creek?" "You know it," Tessa asked, surprised. "Shoot horses for your pa once last winter." The old man's expression darkened. "Heard that land was acquired by Dakota recently. Didn't know they'd killed for it." "We need information," Quincy said. "Proof linking a man named Harlan to Dakota Mining. Any official documents, witnesses, anything that would stand up in front of a federal marshal." Tobias sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Harlan Brock, Dakota's head of security." He made quotation marks in the air with his fingers. "Mean piece of work. Has a scar down his right cheek from a knife fight in Cheyenne." Tessa leaned forward. "That's him. You know where we might find evidence against him?" "Dakota keeps its records in their office on Main Street. And Harlan himself has been staying at the Western Hotel for the past month." Tobias scratched his beard. "But you won't get near either place without being spotted. Town's crawling with Dakota men." "We need to try," Tessa insisted. Tobias studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Got a friend who cleans at the hotel. She might help if the price is right." "We have money," Quincy assured him. "Not talking about money. Ella's boy is sick consumption. Needs medicine from back east, but she can't afford it. If she helps us, we'll get her boy the medicine," Tessa promised. "Whatever it costs." Tobias nodded, apparently satisfied. "You can sleep in the hayloft tonight. I'll send word to Ella. See what she says." Morning brought Ella herself, a thin woman with tired eyes and capable hands. She listened silently as Tessa explained what had happened and what they needed. "I clean Harlan Brock's room," she confirmed. "Man's a pig, leaves papers everywhere, doesn't even see me when I'm working." She twisted her apron in her hands. "I've seen letters with the Dakota letterhead. Instructions about convincing homesteaders to sell." Hope surged in Tessa's chest. "Could you get one of those letters? Or tell us when he'll be away so we can search ourselves." Ella hesitated, fear evident in her expression. Tessa reached for the other woman's hand. "I know what I'm asking is dangerous. But these men killed my father in cold blood, and they'll do it again if they're not stopped. Please." After a long moment, Ella nodded. "Harlan goes to the Dakota office every morning at 9, stays till noon. Rooms on the second floor, last door on the right. I'll create a distraction downstairs if you need to get out quick." She looked between them. "But if you're caught, you never met me." "Understood," Quincy agreed. "And your boy will get his medicine, whatever happens." With a plan in place, Tessa and Quincy prepared to enter town separately. Tessa would go first, dressed in clothes borrowed from Ella that made her look like any other working woman in Rivercross. Quincy would follow 30 minutes later, taking a different route to the Western Hotel. "Remember," Quincy said as he helped adjust her shawl, "if anything feels wrong, you get out. We meet back here no matter what." Tessa nodded, though they both knew she wouldn't leave without evidence. "Be careful," she said softly, pressing a quick kiss to his lips. "You too," he replied, holding her gaze a moment longer than necessary. So much remained unsaid between them, promises and possibilities that would have to wait until this dangerous business was concluded. Rivercross was busy when Tessa entered, keeping her head down and her pace unhurried. The Western Hotel stood in the center of town, a 2-story building with a wide porch and large windows. Tessa slipped inside, relieved to find the lobby relatively empty. A bored clerk barely glanced up as she headed for the stairs, moving like someone who belonged there. The second floor was deserted. Tessa made her way to the last door on the right, her heart pounding. She tried the handle locked, as expected. From her pocket, she withdrew a hairpin Ella had given her with brief instructions on its use. After a minute of tense manipulation, the lock clicked open. Harlan's room was exactly as Ella had described, clothing strewn about, whiskey bottles on the dresser, papers scattered across a small desk by the window. Tessa closed the door softly behind her and went straight to the desk. Most of the papers were useless receipts, wanted posters, a letter from what appeared to be a sweetheart back east. Then, beneath a half-empty bottle, she found a letter on Dakota Mining Company stationery, signed by the company president himself. Regarding the Harper property, it read, "Secure by any means necessary. Additional compensation for quick resolution." Tessa's hands shook as she folded the letter and tucked it into her bodice. This was a proof that Dakota had authorized Harlan to take their land by force. She continued searching, finding 2 more letters that mentioned resistant homesteaders and necessary force. She was reaching for a leather portfolio when footsteps sounded in the hallway. Tessa froze, her blood turning to ice as the footsteps stopped outside the door. A key rattled in the lock. Frantically, she looked around for escape or concealment. The window was too far, the armoire too obvious. The bed was the only option, a large four-poster with a dust ruffle that reached the floor. Tessa rolled beneath it just as the door swung open. From her hiding place, she could see only boots entering the room, large, mud-caked boots that could only belong to a man. The door closed with a thud that seemed to echo her racing heartbeat. "Damn paperwork," a gruff voice muttered Harlan's voice. She would know it anywhere after that terrible day at the homestead. The boots moved to the desk where she'd just been searching. Papers rustled, drawers opened and closed. Tessa pressed a hand over her mouth to quiet her breathing, praying he wouldn't notice the disturbed state of his documents. A knock at the door made both Tessa and Harlan freeze. "What?" Harlan barked. "Sir, Mr. Peterson wants to see you immediately." A voice called through the door. "Says there's a problem at the North property." Harlan swore colorfully. "Tell him I'm coming." The boots moved away from the desk, paused by the dresser, then headed for the door. It opened and closed, and silence fell over the room. Tessa remained motionless, counting to 100 before daring to crawl out from under the bed. She moved to the window and peered out cautiously. In the street below, she could see Harlan's distinctive figure striding toward the Dakota office. Time to go. She slipped from the room, closed the door quietly behind her, and made her way downstairs. In the lobby, she spotted Quincy pretending to read a newspaper. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave an imperceptible nod before folding his paper and heading outside. Tessa followed a minute later, taking a different route back to the livery stable. Her heart didn't stop pounding until she was safely inside Tobias's house, the stolen letters clutched in her hand. "Got them," she announced breathlessly when Quincy entered shortly after. "Letters proving Dakota ordered Harlan to take our land, by any means necessary." Quincy's face broke into a relieved smile. "That's what we needed. Now we just have to get to Helena and the federal marshal." Their celebration was cut short by Tobias bursting through the door, his face grave. "You two need to leave. Now." "Dakota men are searching the town. Someone saw you coming out of the hotel and recognized you, Miss Harper." Quincy was already on his feet. "Back way out. Through the stable. I'll saddle your horse." Tobias hesitated. "There's a freight wagon leaving for Helena in 10 minutes. Might be safer than riding. They'll be watching the trails." "Do it," Quincy decided. Minutes later, they were hidden beneath canvas in the back of a freight wagon, surrounded by crates bound for Helena. The letters were secured inside Tessa's bodice, and Quincy kept his revolver ready. As the wagon rumbled out of town, they heard shouts and the thunder of hoofbeats. The search was intensifying. "Think they'll stop the wagon?" Tessa whispered. "Possibly. Stay quiet and follow my lead if they do." They lay side by side in the cramped space, barely breathing as the wagon picked up speed. After what seemed an eternity, the sounds of pursuit faded. The wagon had made it past the town limits without being searched. Quincy relaxed slightly, his arm going around Tessa's shoulders. "You were brave in there," he murmured. "Could have gone wrong a dozen ways." "Still might," she reminded him. "Helena's 2 days away." 2 days, then justice for your father." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "And after that?" The question hung between them, full of possibility. Tessa turned to face him in the dim light filtering through the canvas. "After that," she said softly, "maybe we find our way back to your cabin. If you want company, that is." Quincy's eyes, visible even in the shadows, held hers. "I think Wolf would like that. He's grown fond of you." "Just Wolf," she teased gently. His answer was a kiss tender and full of promise. "Not just Wolf," he whispered against her lips. The journey to Helena was tense but uneventful. They remained hidden when the wagon stopped overnight, sharing water and dried beef in whispered conversation. By the time they reached the territorial capital, both were stiff and exhausted, but determination kept them moving. The federal marshal's office was a substantial brick building flying the American flag. Marshal James Hollister, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility, listened to their story with growing concern. "These letters," he said, examining the Dakota mining documents, "combined with your testimony, are enough for me to issue warrants. But you understand the company will fight this. They have lawyers, money." "All I want is justice for my father," Tessa said firmly. "And to stop them from doing this to anyone else." Marshal Hollister nodded slowly. "I'll need you both to stay in Helena until the investigation is complete. Can arrange protection if necessary." "We'll stay," Quincy confirmed, his hand finding Tessa's. What followed were weeks of statements, depositions, and waiting. Dakota Mining sent lawyers who attempted to discredit Tessa's testimony, but the letters spoke for themselves. When news of the investigation spread, other homesteaders came forward with similar stories of intimidation, though none had ended in murder before. Harlan Brock was arrested attempting to flee to Canada. 2 of his associates were captured soon after. The president of Dakota Mining denied knowledge of their actions, but further investigation revealed a pattern of illegal land seizures that implicated the entire company leadership. Through it all, Quincy remained by Tessa's side, a steady presence as she relived her father's murder in testimony after testimony. At night, in the modest boarding house where the marshal had arranged their stay, they spoke of the future in cautious, hopeful terms. "Your land will be returned to you," Quincy said one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch. "You could rebuild the homestead." Tessa was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint Helena's buildings gold. "I don't think I could live there again. Too many memories." She glanced at him. "But I was thinking. That creek on your property would be perfect for a garden. If you wouldn't mind the company." Quincy's face softened. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Been thinking about building an addition to the cabin. Maybe a proper bedroom. Kitchen with a window." "Sounds like you're planning for more than just me," Tessa observed with a small smile. "Well," he said, a hint of color rising in his cheeks, "a man can hope for a family someday. If you were amenable." Tessa's heart swelled. "I think I could be very amenable. But Quincy Wade, if you're proposing, you could be a bit more direct about it." He laughed, the sound rich and warm in the evening air. Never been accused of being too subtle before. His expression grew serious as he took both her hands in his. "Tessa Harper, from the moment you collapsed at that river's edge, and I said, 'Hold on, I've got you now,' I think I was already falling in love with you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Tessa's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." His kiss was gentle but full of promise, the first of many they would share over a lifetime together. Justice came in October 1876. Harlan Brock and his associates were convicted of murder and sentenced to hang. The president of Dakota Mining and 3 board members faced prison terms for conspiracy and fraud. The company's assets were frozen, and arrangements were made to return stolen lands to their rightful owners. Marshall Hollister personally delivered the news to Tessa and Quincy. "It's over," he told them. "Your father's killers will face justice, and Dakota Mining won't be threatening anyone else's home." "Thank you," Tessa said, emotion thick in her voice, "for believing me when others wouldn't." "Just doing my job, madam." The marshal tipped his hat. "You two free to go home now, wherever that might be." Home. The word held new meaning as they prepared to leave Helena. Tessa's uncle had arrived from Denver, helping to settle her father's affairs and attending the trials. He offered her a place in his household, but she declined with a glance toward Quincy. "I've found where I belong," she told him simply. They were married in Helena's small church before departing, with Marshall Hollister and Tessa's uncle as witnesses. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, both bride and groom having weathered enough storms to value the simplicity of their vows. To love and cherish, in good times and bad, until death do us part, they promised each other. Winter was approaching as they made their way back to Quincy's cabin, now their cabin. Wolf greeted them with enthusiastic barking, circling Tessa as though welcoming her home at last. The cabin seemed smaller than Tessa remembered, but no less welcoming. As Quincy built a fire in the hearth, she moved about the space, unpacking the few possessions she'd acquired in Helena, including wedding gifts from her uncle linens, cookware, and a beautiful quilt for their bed. Strange, she mused, how quickly a place can become home. Quincy looked up from the fire, his face warmed by the growing flames. "It's not the place," he said. "It's the people in it." That first winter as husband and wife passed in a blur of contentment. True to his word, Quincy began adding to the cabin a larger bedroom, a proper kitchen with windows overlooking the creek. Tessa planted an indoor herb garden, planning for a larger one when spring came. They developed routines and rituals: coffee shared at dawn, reading aloud by firelight in the evenings, walks through the snow-covered forest with Wolf bounding ahead. They learned each other's bodies with the same care they learned each other's hearts, passion tempered by tenderness, desire deepened by love. When spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and birdsong to the mountains, Tessa had news of her own. "I think," she told Quincy one morning as they stood on the porch watching the sunrise, "we might need to add another room to the cabin. By winter." It took him a moment to understand, but when he did, his face transformed with joy. He lifted her off her feet in an embrace that spoke volumes, his laughter echoing across the valley. "A family," he whispered against her hair. "Our family." Their daughter was born the following December, Catherine Sarah Wade, named for both their mothers. She arrived during a gentle snowfall, with only Wolf as a witness to Quincy's nervous pacing outside the bedroom door, while the midwife from Rivercross attended Tessa. "She has your eyes," Tessa told him when he finally held his daughter, all written across his features. "And your courage, I'd wager," he replied, voice thick with emotion. As the years passed, their family grew. Catherine was joined by 2 brothers, Thomas and James. The cabin expanded accordingly, becoming a proper home with rooms for the children, a large kitchen where Tessa taught Catherine to bake, and a workshop where Quincy crafted furniture from local timber. They never returned to Tessa's father's homestead, but they visited his grave each year, teaching the children about the grandfather they would never know and the importance of standing up for what was right. Rivercross grew into a proper town, with Quincy occasionally serving as deputy when the sheriff needed help. Tessa taught at the schoolhouse once the children were old enough, sharing her love of books with a new generation. Their reputation as the couple who brought down Dakota Mining gave them a certain standing in the community, though neither sought recognition for what they considered simple justice. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit on their porch, watching their children play in the yard with an aging but still spirited wolf. Sometimes, Tessa would catch Quincy watching her with the same intensity he had shown that first day by the river. "What are you thinking?" she would ask. And he would smile, lines crinkling around eyes still as blue as the Montana sky. "Just that I'm the luckiest man alive. Found you when you needed me most, and somehow you decided to stay." "Best decision I ever made," she would reply, leaning into his embrace. 20 years after Tessa collapsed at the river's edge and Quincy Wade caught her, saying those words that changed both their lives. "Hold on, I've got you now," they stood together on that same riverbank. Their children were nearly grown, the oldest already courting a young man from town, the boys tall and strong like their father. "Hard to believe it's been so long," Tessa mused, her hand in Quincy's as it had been countless times over the years. "Not so hard," he replied, bringing her fingers to his lips. "Best years of my life. Every one of them." The Yellowstone River flowed on, unchanged by the decades, indifferent to the human drama that had unfolded on its banks. But Tessa and Quincy Wade had been forever altered by that chance encounter, two souls adrift who found in each other not just sanctuary, but home. And as they turned to walk back to their cabin, now a proper house filled with laughter and love, Tessa knew with absolute certainty that when Quincy had caught her that day, he hadn't just saved her life, he had given her a reason to live it fully, deeply, and with a joy she had never imagined possible in those dark days after her father's murder. "I love you, Quincy Wade," she said simply, the words no less powerful for having been spoken thousands of times before. "And I love you, Tessa Wade," he answered, as he always had and always would. "From that first day until my last."